Good afternoon, everyone. This is Ed Scott, the CEO of Electrify, and on behalf of CDO Magazine and its 350,000 readers in over 175 countries globally, we are very, very excited to welcome Tracy Daniels. Tracy, it's great to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. A pleasure to be here with you today, Ed.
I want to point out that I think our readers should try and understand the complexity that Tracy grapples with and the organization grapples with each and every day on data quality and responsibility and so forth. And imagine if you are trying to report to regulators or to a board or otherwise on Basel requirements or derivatives requirements or risk requirements of one sort or another, so many that I can't even remember, Tracy. And the criticality of the attestation is just beyond doubt. And I'm so pleased that you went there on this notion of responsibility, because I think so many organizations, people feel that they're in a silo and they don't necessarily feel the connectivity to how the data progresses along in the enterprise to actually get to a result or a report or a recommendation or otherwise, all the way through machine learning and so forth.
That's right. And it becomes even harder, right, as you start to have these black boxes that will proliferate, right, in the environment. That, again, the understanding of how well you did up front, how much you can measure coming out the other side become even more important.
Correct. May I jump in and ask sort of an adjacent question here? And how are you thinking about unstructured data, Tracy? And even though we didn't, kind of prep for this, but this is the data source that I think is actually the fastest growing in the enterprise.
Did you not see me smile and get excited that you had that?
Whether it's in the call center or whether it's
right.
On a PDF, an email in a semi-structured fashion. How are you all thinking about this, and what insights can you share with our audience today?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the, and we've long talked about it. Like, again, as we've, as we're managing these different platforms, I always sort of look over to my left and I look at our unstructured store, particularly around all the documents, and think, good gracious, wouldn't it be great if we could do way more than just store that information and sort of pepper it lightly for, elements, right, at best. Of course, now that you look at these LLMs that are out there and moving swiftly into maturity and production, I get excited about mining all of these unstructured data stores, right, for insights and data quality and amendments to data that we can make, right? And I think about the opportunity to continue to mature our NLP and dive deeper into what we're hearing or seeing on the screen. I think about not just mining that information and using it, but then also the ability to start to create content, right? Which is maybe more context sensitive than we've been able to do before. So I'm right there with you, Ed. I love the promise of unstructured data and its ability to, I think, become even more powerful in the enterprise now.
One of the challenges of unstructured data is there isn't a standardized way to actually, build a pipeline around it and so forth. And it's tricky in that regard. But maybe you could give us some insight into your recent comment on to build some content around this. So what type of content and what type of application and utility? It's a great dollop you just dropped there, and I want to follow up on that.
So I would say this is not like a truest idea per se, right? So I'm not talking specifically about truest IP or something. But what I think about is, again, the ability to mine that information, derive insights, and then think about how do you create something new with that, or how do you answer a question differently because you could get to that treasure trove of information. But one of the things I also think about, again, from maybe a generative perspective or content creation perspective, is now that you have that information and you have the ability to mimic text or language really well, can you make service even more personal, right, for your users based on that type of information that you're getting to? Can you mine language and understand sentiment and maybe give it back to your customers in a way that informs them, in a way that makes them trust you more, in a way that maybe mimics elements of themselves that would give them comfort and trust. But again, not in a creepy way, but can you, really start to create, again, content that's truly personalized?
Well, I think a very interesting area here, you brought it up, is in the NLP and then the sentiment analysis, and just off the top of my head, imagine all of your products, credit cards, mortgage products, whatever it is for any business, right? And being able to understand, let's say somebody called into a call center, had a question about a product or a service or something like that. Being able to understand, that sentiment, being able to understand that customer's journey in its full totality, right? And empowering that agent, with being able to make a recommendation and so forth that is likely hits the mark for the customer. That's a very powerful, modality and application. And I hope
absolutely.
I hope our listeners are tuned to this, what Tracy is focused on, because I think this is we're all hearing a lot about large language models and NLP and lots of acronyms, but she's taking the plane down to the specific applications that can actually drive business value, which is really what we're going to discuss today. So let's pivot a little bit, Tracy, and let's talk about how are the business units at the bank and other institutions that you've been part of or that you know of, how are they thinking about AI and ML and NLP and computer vision, or are they? And how should we, as data practitioners and leaders, begin to define success? Because it's critical to have that KPI, that ROI, and to be able to point to it, right? And to have buy-in on that. So a lot wrapped up there in that question, but can we dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting with the generative excitement. I find business partners are very interested in leaning into the conversation. I think with the tangible nature of generative, right, that they can play with it, see it, they can understand the applications in their daily life. The conversation, it's much more of a pull from them versus the push of like, let me tell you all the cool things you could do. But I think there's this really interesting pivot or inflection point is maybe a better term, where the businesses are truly buyers, and whether or not they understand the underlying technology, irrelevant. They understand the power and potential of it, and so are thinking through applications with their lines of business. So I think that partnership becomes much more fruitful and powerful when they're thinking about it, and they can really productize the technology for their lines of business. So then from there, right, it's like prioritizing which of these things are we going to do? How are we going to decide which ones are, first or better? And then how do we, to your point, talk about the value? And I don't know that I've heard a ton different in the value conversation around what's the return, how many eyeballs, market share, reduced touch time, fewer calls into a call center or first call resolution. Those are all still really important measures and metrics. I think what will also be interesting is some of the knock-on effects that we didn't expect, right? And can you start to put some, I don't know if you call them stretch metrics or maybe slightly intangible metrics out there that you're really striving for, that these technologies start to bring. So if I can lower call volume or the need for a second or third call, can I also start to see things like my net promoter score go up? Can I start to tie that to how sticky and deep the relationship gets? Not just because I may be doing an even better job of, offering the next product, but because I'm doing such a good job of addressing your product needs, your servicing needs, showing empathy, more appropriately and acutely. Does that make me want to use you more as a company, as a trusted brand? And will I tell more people about you?
I love your responses that you brought. You gave us a number of different ways to go here. First and foremost, AI and ML have to move beyond the science project into the business value. And I think over the last, my observation, Tracy, I'm interested in yours, but over the last 3-4 years, sort of AI and ML sort of come in sine waves. It comes in, waves of interest, and then it wanes, gets off the top pages of the papers. But it seems that the large language models have effectively crazy glued AI and ML to the boardroom table. It's not going anywhere this time. And I think the business unit leaders have picked up on this, and I think they're actually quite intrigued, with the possibility to optimize their operations or drive top line growth in their specific business units, whatever it is. And I do think you're right. There is a pull, and this is the first pull, if you will, of an application or a solution on top of the modern data stack. And I think it has the potential to be quite large in that regard. Back to your conversations on governance, privacy, and security. Before we let everybody go open up all the toys and the gifts and the LLM, let's have a real world chat about the risk to the organization and the possibilities. There are 3 ways someone can access, the technology right now in the LLM. You can go into OpenAI, you can get a private instance, or you can build your own, train your own LLM. What are your views on how the organization needs to be thinking about risk, and what are your views on the 3 options that enterprise clients and business units face?
Yeah, and I think it depends on the organization, right? For us, we've chosen to partner with some of our trusted partners to help us learn the technology, do proofs of concepts. We are working hand in hand with our lines of business to vet the business use cases and again, learn on these technologies. As an organization, we actually don't allow people to have just general access, right? From the Truist Network to these models. We don't want things leaking that shouldn't be leaking. And again, sometimes, not malicious at all, just poor choices could lead to things that we don't want happening with our data. So we also are looking at, when do we and where do we place the load? Again, we want to leverage the economies of doing things, in the cloud or with providers, but we want to do it safely. So we want our own instance. We're talking about, do you train in the cloud? Do you move to production on-prem? Do you have a combination of the 2? So we're looking at those things. But to your point, in all of those, right, part of the conversation at the onset is how are we protecting our data, right? Both physically and digitally, but also are we thinking about third and fourth party when we enter into these type of arrangements, even with our partners? Who owns the IP? If that's a question to be answered as we go through this. And then how do we continue to monitor, right, as things change, both in the environment, the type of data, if you're moving from one provider to another, all that kind of good stuff, but make sure it's not a one and done. It's a continual process of thinking through our governance, thinking through how we protect the data, thinking through the arrangements that we have with the partners we might be engaging with.
And I hope our listeners are paying attention to this, because it's not, these issues that Tracy are referring to are very complicated, and there are risks, and so governance and security and privacy are all wrapped up here and must be addressed within the context of everything we're talking about here, but in particular the large language models. Tracy, just a question for you, and just off the top of your head, do you think most enterprises will end up dealing with OpenAI, just the public version, or do you think they'll end up dealing with a private instance, or just build it themselves and train it themselves? What do you think is going to happen?
I think going to be a lot of partnership. I'm not sure. Again, depending on your business and what you think your differentiator, why you would build your own versus maybe train, right, a model with your data and figure out how you kind of arrange for that.
Correct.
And I'm sure there are factors that go into, do you go with a Microsoft version, an OpenAI version, or even some of these enriched versions that sit on top of these foundational models, right? So there's factors in deciding that. We're definitely in the partner realm.
Well, I think all of us would be well served by visiting Tracy's LinkedIn page from time to time to see what pearls of wisdom she drops up on there for all of us to take advantage of. On behalf of CDO and the CDO Magazine and all of the listeners around the world, Tracy Daniels, thank you so much for your time today.
It has been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much, Ed.